projects, wanting to come up with attendant care, which was what I was involved in. You know, alternatives to nursing homes. People had models. They'd been tried out overseas. You know, we heard about what was happening in Berkeley. We heard what was happening in Scandinavia. Well, I think that, you know, there used to be, I think there was a bumper sticker around years ago that disability rights are not special rights. And I think, you know, this comes back to the notion that, you know, people with disabilities are second-class citizens and almost still subhuman or not quite human. And, you know, I think that's for a couple of things. And this is where the attitudinal stuff is just so important to confront. I think, you know, Michael Oliver, who was the first professor of disability studies in the 70s, mentioned this notion of disability as a personal tragedy. We always assume that disability is something that is harmful, is aberrant. It's like it's not normal. It's something that must cause people pain and suffering. You know, and our argument, you know, like the kind of, if we twist the philosophy, I am disabled, therefore I suffer. It's almost like the two things are there. Our argument is, look, there are some forms of impairment that do cause pain, as in physical pain, and might cause tiredness or fatigue, or but often it's actually the encounter. It's the impairment's encounter with society. It's, in fact, it's the rejection, it's the betrayals, it's the being laughed at. You know, you think about in the schoolyard, it's people's attitudes that cause the suffering. It's the social interaction. You know, I can remember one of my students, an elderly student who had quite severe rheumatoid arthritis, and I can remember her saying to me, look, you know, sure, my arthritis causes me pain and suffering, but nowhere near as bad as the shit I get every day, she said. And then she went on and on and on, and then she said, I follow a long list of disabled women who've had their husbands leave them, she said. We were all a bit shocked at the time. But this notion, again, that disability is some kind of aberration. You know, I mean, I think it was Aristotle who, long time ago, the famous philosopher, he talked about the fact that an anomaly, there were anomalies. I mean, disability is an anomaly in the sense that it doesn't happen all as frequently, and it's not a common thing. But anomaly doesn't necessarily mean abnormality. In fact, anomalies and diversity are part of not just the human world, but in fact the animal world. And we should be embracing that diversity. The other aspect of this, and I try and do this in my teaching now, is actually to showcase the fact that people often achieve things not in spite of their disability, but because of their disability. Some of our profoundly creative people in society, whether it be musicians, thinkers, writers, have done so because of their disability experience. And you know, disability if we listen enough, is another way of viewing ways of being human. So I think the problem we have with rights discourse is if we keep seeing disability as an afterthought, oh, that lot, we haven't factored them in, the exception to the rule, we're always going to have problems there, because if you're an exception to the rule, there's not going to be money left. Whereas if we see disability as not just part of normal diversity in the community, but we see the fact disability affects large percentages of the population. I mean, there's debates. Are disabled people a minority group? I don't think so. I think, in fact, we have large slabs of the population with particular kinds of impairment. The other thing is that our system's very cruel, because often we say, well, if you want rights, or if you want remedies, or if you want restitution, you have to show that you've suffered. You know, you have to show that something terrible's happened to you. So people are constantly locked into this kind of process. If you're a disabled person, you have to keep saying, well, I've been victimised, all these terrible things have happened to me, in order to get access to justice, for example. So I think, you know, I think we need to transform the way we do things. And this affects ethics. It affects decisions about who has the right to live, who has the right to die, who can get access to transplant surgery, for example. You mentioned about access to health. Well, you know, if, for example, people with certain forms of intellectual disability do not have the same priority ranking for transplants, for example. We have a situation in the UK, not in Australia, but in the UK, that if you get government-funded prenatal testing, and if you get the government funding, if those test results come back positive, in other words, the test results show that you are carrying a fetus that potentially might have some kind of disability, you are obliged when you sign the form to have a termination. So these are the logical ends of these kinds of policies. We have another policy proposal in the US that says, the land of the free and the brave, that says you have the right to choose, you have the right to be free, you have the right to choose to remain disabled, even though technologies and medicine and pharmaceutical drugs might be there to correct your disability or at least reduce it. Sure, you have the choice to be disabled under our system, but don't expect the government to enable you to have access to anti-discrimination legislation to protect you for welfare decisions. So these got huge implications. You know, a woman who's pregnant, very vulnerable time. Sure, you have the right to continue with your pregnancy, but again, don't expect you to have access to those support services if you continue with that pregnancy. Now, this is very, very dangerous rhetoric, and it's based on an assumption that disabled people are a burden. And my view is we need to start challenging and confronting this notion that disability is automatically negative.